Before the warning lights, before the voices crackled and the station changed shape around them, the morning moved with the trivial certainties of school bells and steam from breakfast trays. 16-year-old Kaya Noor sat beneath a wall of hydroponic lettuce, tutoring a 9-year-old who kept confusing numerators and oxygen flow rates. The cafeteria's ceiling windows showed the planet below, a blue-green marble named Ulla, rolling past like a slow thought. Kaya's right hand smudged pencil across her palm as she sketched fractions on the kid's tablet. Patient, but firm, counting softly to 3 when the child's breaths turned shallow. 3 beats to steady your hands, she said. It was a thing her mother used to say when Kaya learned to solder components, when heat trembled in the air and a wrong twitch could ruin a board. The boy copied her breath. His shoulders relaxed. Across the aisle, Sarah Brecht leaned with her back to a vending pillar, braid tucked into her jacket, boots unlaced. 13, all elbows and sinew. Sarah had one knee hugged to her chest and a contraband radio wedged into her ear. She tweaked a dial and smirked at the slush of distant freighter chatter. They're late again, she told Kaya without looking up. Supply barge from Hestia's belt was due at 0800. Another pause. Maybe they found a new kind of coffee and decided we don't deserve it. We deserve everything, Kaya said, pretending severity and failing. She looked up as Sarah's little brother Leo sprinted past, a meteor in a shirt 2 sizes too big, chasing a drone the maintenance crew had reprogrammed into a toy. At 10, Leo built things out of scrap and hope and then kept them running with enchantments that were really just careful routines. He yelped as the drone clipped a chair and caromed into the wall. Easy, Sarah said, catching the drone one-handed as it fluttered down. You break it, you fix it. I am not begging Riss in maintenance for more rotors. Leo took the drone back, thumbs gentle. I'm making it smarter, he said, as though that excuse could keep the universe in one piece. If I can teach it to navigate the ducts, it could deliver messages when comms are busy. That's what the comm network is for, Kaya said, and then, because Leo's eyes were too bright to dim, but that's clever. Commodore Elias Rourke kept a strict solitude at mid-morning. He took his tea in the observation walkway that circled Docking Ring B, standing with his feet shoulder-width apart, like a man ready for a sudden change of gravity. He was leaner than his portraits. The little scar by his mouth tugged down the left side of his frown, making him look perpetually skeptical of the cosmos. On the rail beside him sat a silent appointment, a folded letter on a slate addressed in his own hand to a daughter who would not read it yet. Ship logs and budgets had consumed his night. He allowed himself this loop in artificial dawn, the hiss of air recyclers and the thud of cargo clamps docking somewhere far below like a heart in the station's ribs. Vale Station was a wheel of habitat and industry hung at Ulla's L Point, home to 300 families and 1,000 transients. Peaceful by design, modest defenses, a place for studying microbes on the planet for growing kale in children. Dr. Sana Elbaz had already been up for 5 hours. She didn't bother with cafeterias. There was coffee in the xenosemiotics lab, and there were signals in the dust. She sat with her chin in her hand, staring through a glass wall at an array of antennas like a fleet of patient birds. The overnight sensor logs lay in a river across her screen. Burst transmissions, ordinary telemetry, the occasional flare of a solar hiccup from Ulla's star. Her team chased patterns in foreign math, looking for intent in the noise. Sana wore her wedding ring on a lanyard. It tapped her sternum when she leaned forward. Her husband lived planetside half the year, studying plankton spirals blooming in Ulla's seas. Distance had become a rhythm. She trusted rhythms. She ran a filter sweep, watched meaningless spikes resolve into more precise meaninglessness, and made a note: teach the interns to ignore ghosts. Below the lab, the school's gym echoed with the soft thump of feet. Mateo Andrade, 15, moved through his forms at the far end. A slow choreography of balance and breath he'd learned from his grandmother, who'd carried it from a hillside village and taught it in space because mountains and stations both required a sense of edges. Mateo's mother ran logistics for Ring A. His father worked hydroponics. He'd grown up carrying crates and splitting his focus between repetition and novelty. When to step as trained, when to improvise. He finished his sequence, bowed to an absent instructor, and sent a message to Kaya. Practice? She typed back after tutoring. Don't start without me or I'll tell Ms. Imani you forgot to sanitize your gloves in biolab again. On the station's promenade, a man no one recognized paused at a window and stared through the curve of glass into the star-salted dark. He blended perfectly. That was the point of good infiltration. Looked tired in a way that matched the local fatigue. He scratched his chin, smiled at a passing family, and then glanced at his reflection to check the rhythm of his borrowed face. In his ear, a whisper, docking in 9. He picked up a pamphlet about the Ula Ocean Conservancy and pretended to read. Under his jacket, folded in fine cloth, was a contract written in a language the station's lawyers didn't read. In the cafeteria, the announcements board ticked by in its cheerful silence. Sarah kicked Kaya's shoe and nodded toward it. "They're recruiting for the planet camp next month," she said. "I'm going to apply. If I get selected, I'm going to swim in a sea with plankton that glows and then come back and make Leo jealous." "You can barely swim," Kaya observed. Sarah stood in a mock heroic pose. "I can float menacingly." "That is enough," Kaya snorted. Leo launched the drone again, gentler now, and let it hover over his palm like a living thing. "3 beats," he murmured, like a private exorcism. Kaya smiled at that. The station's ordinary day folded itself around them like a familiar blanket. Teachers drifted past. A medic laughed at a joke he'd heard 100 times. A pair of botanists argued about magnesium. On a distant deck, a quartet rehearsed a piece for 2 violins, a guitar, and a saw. The saw keened sweetly, an aching human ghost in the steel. The first anomaly arrived as a rhythm mismatch. Sanaa's screen hiccuped and then steadied, not with noise, but with silence where noise should be. She leaned in. "What are you?" she said aloud, to nobody, to the pattern itself. She ran the sweep again and saw it. A notch in the background, precise as a surgeon's cut. Not natural. She pivoted to a secondary console, fingers moving without conscious orders, and told the antenna array to widen its scope. She didn't page anyone yet. She wanted to be wrong in private. Elias sipped his tea and watched the vector of a freighter on approach, steady and cautious, humming with transponder codes that said she belonged. Beside the freighter, a speck of nothing drifted across the stars. It might have been a chunk of foil, a latched panel from some previous job. It might have been the sort of tiny thing that never mattered until it did. He opened his mouth to ask Dock Control if they'd noticed the debris. His comm crackled. "Commodore, we have an oddity on long range." "Say it," Elias said. "Gap in the scatterband, sir, artificial. Might be masking." He set his tea down very gently. "Alert level yellow," quietly. "Pull the children drills up the stack." The man on the promenade folded his pamphlet, tucked it into the bin, and walked toward a lift. His borrowed face smiled at a child who stepped aside for him. The lift doors closed on him and 3 others. A dormitory cook, a botany intern, a courier from Ring F. He kept his hands at his sides as the car hummed downward. He kept his mind on the contract in fine cloth. A guarantee of sale backed by the Karth Consortium, signed by an arch-contractor with the entitlement of old empires. Labor, chattel, child. These were words that meant different things in different corners of the stars. He'd learned the laws carefully. He'd learned where they did not reach. He had a black market map of that reach, and he felt comfortable inside the blank spaces. Sana watched the notch widen, then close, then widen again. Someone testing a curtain. She pressed a key that triggered the station's softest alarm. In the cafeteria, the announcement board flickered, and Mr. Harrison, who taught civics and treated it like an emergency discipline, cleared his throat. "We're going to practice corridor drills," he said in the tone that made second graders quiet and made teenagers roll their eyes, pretend, complain, and obey anyway. "Slowly and with our hands on the rail." Sarah, you and Leo together. "Kaya, please escort Yamil." Children stood. Trays rattled. The room breathed in, and somewhere a violin on the deck above caught one long note and held it against the air. In docking ring B, a freighter called Sable Finch extended her docking neck. Her captain survived by being boring and precise. He did not like surprises. He had one now. His navigator frowned at the proximity panel and saw space distort in a way that did not belong in the neighborhood of stationary metal. Something shadowed in, riding the Finch's signature like a remora riding a shark. "We have," the navigator said, and then the shadow flicked its shimmer and kissed the Finch's hull, and the Finch's comms went quiet. The shadow slid on, following the Finch's line into the station's skin. Elias did not run. He moved in a way that made other people run smarter. "Seal B3 through B10, he said, and the deck officer at the console nodded once, pale. "Shunt school traffic into green shelters, not blue, quietly. Repeat that, quietly." He toggled the comm to Sana's lab. "Talk to me." "I don't know what it is," Sana said, "but it is not a solar hiccup and it is not friendly." Do you have a signature? It's not advertising one. Can you make it speak? I can tell it we see it, she said, which was not what he asked and exactly the answer he needed. And I can make it harder to pretend to be physics. Do that. Kaya tightened her fingers around Yamil's small hand. 3 beats to steady. She felt the boy's small pulse tap against her skin and counted them in. 1, 2, 3. Sarah kept Leo on her left between her and the wall, her body an unthinking hinge that opened around him closed to the outside. It's just a drill, she said. Leo nodded, lips pressed together. The drone in his pack buzzed in tiny anxiety, sensing the mismatch between the map and the world. They stepped into the corridor. The lights dimmed 1 notch. The air seemed to grow heavier, and it was not their imaginations. The station shunted atmosphere toward pressure differential zones and built small cushions where it might need them. The man in the lift reached the service corridor. He walked with the correct stride, carrying a crate he'd palmed at a kiosk. Empty, but it completed the shape of an ordinary errand. His ear whispered again. Docking complete. 2 more at airlock D4. He palmed open a utility panel and pulled the fine cloth bundle free. When he unwrapped it, the contract gleamed with embossed seals that would mean everything in a court far from here, and nothing at all in this place if the wrong kind of attention were paid. He slid the contract into his inner pocket and took out the tool he would need first, a little wand that sent comms to sleep in a 5-meter bubble. Santa spoke to the array like coaxing an animal from under a deck. She pulsed the notch with a braided signal, a pattern of primes and intervals that said we are not helpless. The notch fluttered. Something at the edge of their space faltered and reformed. She imagined a fish flinching when a net brushed its fin. She sent the pattern again, and behind it tucked a seed, a query that would unpack in a hostile system as a bright, annoying error. She heard Ms. Imani's class rehearsing that saw again on the deck below, the note tilting with reverence. Sana's screen showed a spike. There you are, she said, and saved the signature in a folder with a label she hated. Acquisition. Elias stepped onto the docking ring bridge and looked down at a circle of screens. The Finch's path glowed docile. The shadow's trace showed as a not-quite absence, like a thing a camera refused to focus on. What do we have in terms of immediate teeth? He asked. 4 hull torches, 2 drone swarms, 6 security, the deck officer said, voice steadying as she recited inventory. We can lock doors and we can boil coffee. We can also count, Elias said softly, not to contradict but to align. Count our children. Know where they are. We're routing them to green shelters, she said. Good. He watched a dot detach from the shadow and drift toward airlock D4. And get me pictures on the D4 camera now. In the green shelter corridor, a bulb flickered and went out. Sarah's head snapped toward it. That's not in the drill, she said, more to herself than to Leo, but he heard anyway and drew closer. The corridor bucked slightly as clamps engaged somewhere, as if the station had taken a step on a steep hillside. Mr. Harrison's voice came through the wall speaker, calm as a lake. Kids, keep moving! Adults, check the numbers. We are coffee boiling boring. He was good at this. He'd practiced for meteoroids no bigger than ice for the possibility of fire. For the kind of loss you could measure with a bucket, he had not rehearsed for contracts. The first of them stepped through D4 like any dock worker. Tall, in slate-gray armor whose panels were shaped to suggest an animal Kaya didn't know. His visor was rimmed with a row of tiny white notches. Next to him, a shorter figure padded silent as a shadow's shadow. The D4 camera sent Elias precisely 3 frames before it went snow. In those 3 frames, he saw insignia he did not recognize. 3 vertical lines like a counting mark, except the 3rd line hooked at the top into a beak. He did not know the species. He did not need to. Their discipline was obvious. Their plan was plain. Move fast, control comms, take what you came for. Santa's error seed bloomed. Not on the shadow itself, but on the dot that would have been a trooper's sideband. It flashed a snippet of code back up the path like a stubborn moth winging home. Sana's console translated none of it. She didn't need words. The rhythm was enough. Command, confirm, move. She keyed station-wide and said, I have a signature. I can jam short-range whispers, not long-range backs. You have a minute of clumsy. Take it, Elias said. All of it. Green Shelter 1's door irised open. Mr. Harrison lifted his hand for patience, file, 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 and saw the first gray figure at the far end of the corridor. He had time to say, all right, and then the figure raised a weapon with a blue mouth. Mr. Harrison stepped forward. as civics demanded. "This is a civilian," he began. The blue mouth coughed light. He folded to the floor like a man kneeling in his own prayer. Leo made a sound like something breaking very far away, and Sarah's fingers clamped his wrist so hard he would later swear he still felt the shape of her hand. Kaya felt the thermostat of her body click from warm to cold. She was holding Yamil. She did not let go. "We're going to the next shelter," she whispered and pulled him sideways into a service alcove. Mateo, at the far end of the hallway, saw the same thing and began to move without thinking. He had trained to step toward danger only when a path existed. He made one. He hit the door override on a maintenance hatch and shouted, "Here!" His voice wasn't loud. The station made jokes about Mateo's voice, quiet as a page turning. It carried anyway, because human hearing grew sharp when choice narrowed to a single corridor. The gray figures advanced in pairs, one watching, one scanning. They did not shoot to kill. They swept the corridor and patted shoulders with gloved hands, and when a child hesitated, they wrapped an arm carefully and moved. "Contracts don't bleed," the man in the lift thought, walking behind them now, his face ordinary. "Contracts get delivered." His wand kept calm, sleeping around them. He liked the efficiency. He liked that they had learned from previous jobs. Stun only to discourage interference. Threaten as needed, not as sport. He had clauses in his pocket that would keep him clean, should anyone ask. He did not consider what a clause meant to a parent. Sana burned the short band. The corridor crackled with static that set teeth on edge. One of the gray soldiers touched his ear and shook his head, irritated. He made a little hand signal to his partner. Fine, they had muscle memory. They had lists. Elias knew the station's defenders by name. Mani, with the scar on her wrist from a falla in the sawmill ring. Ilya, who ran marathons in narrow circles on nights he couldn't sleep. Haruta, whose daughter painted birds that looked like equations. He sent them now, pairs to corridors, trios to choke points, not to be heroes, but to lay time in the hallway like a rug for children to walk across. "You don't win this," he told them on the open channel. "You buy minutes and you live." He would not let them bleed for a story. Kaya squeezed Sarah's shoulder as they slid through the maintenance hatch, Leo in between. "3 beats," Kaya said, and was surprised to hear her voice steady. "3 beats to steady," Sarah nodded. The words latched onto something in her chest and held her ribs together. In the shadows, Leo's drone twitched as if trying to taste the air through a network it could not see. "Can you send a message on the ducts?" Kaya asked him. "Not yet," Leo whispered. "But—" He took the drone's little panel off. His fingers were small, quick. He looked at Sarah, then to Kaya. "If I hook it to the station's maintenance sensor net, the one that counts airflow, I can maybe piggyback. It's not on comms, it's like whispering through the vents." "Do it," Sarah said. "Do it now." The first parent who tried to break the line was a botanist with green under his nails. He shoved past a gray shoulder and threw himself at the soldier like a dam built of bone. The second frame of the D4 camera that still caught and printed in Elias's mind forever showed the botanist's face, open and terrified and furious, like any animal who has seen its young in a trap. The blue mouth coughed again and the botanist slumped without blood. Not dead. Stunned. The soldier stepped over him carefully, not to hurt, but the effect was hurt anyway. Contracts don't consider optics except in market reports. Sana saw the echo of her seed move farther down the notch. It had been noticed. That meant someone was on the other end deciding whether to turn their head and look. "Look at me," she said into the antenna pickups, a prayer that had become procedure long before she owned it. "Don't look at our kids. Look at me." She composed a little melody of numbers that had proven irresistible to bored machine minds and played it. On her screen, a tail length of code unfurled in response, a signature crumb. She captured it. Karth Consortium Arch 4 Act Child Clause 47. She did not swear out loud. She did not need to. Her intern swore for her. Elias's jaw went rigid at the same time. Santa sent him the signature. He knew the name Vor from briefs, from quiet warnings. The Karth Consortium was an empire with the decency of legal forms. They did not scorch worlds. They acquired. They moved sons of value without spilling a glass. He toggled to the station wide. "This is Rourke," he said, voice low as a growl a father makes. "Everyone listening, we have a consortium team in our halls. They intend to take our children. We will not permit it." He did not say how. He did not need to, and he did not yet know. In the maintenance duct, Leo's drone blinked. He fed it power from his pack. He jacked it into a panel that had probably not been touched since the station's second year. Dust made his eyes itch. Sarah's hands cupped around the light so it would not leak into the corridor. Kaya held Yamil, who breathed in ragged hiccups against her sleeve. "You're doing good," she said. "We're a team," Leo whispered to the drone. "Because people who love machines sing to them without knowing." "Carry it," he said, not a command, a favor. The drone's little antenna trembled. The gray soldiers herded 10 children into a neat cluster. They scanned wrists, faces, heights, weights. The man with the borrowed face checked numbers on a slate. He had a courteous voice. "We are not here to hurt you," he said, and believed it. "You will be assessed and placed appropriately. Breathe through your nose." He was in his own mind humane. He did not look at the parents because that part unsteadied him. His clauses were his armor. He told himself the Karth lifted populations out of waste and into purpose. Children adapted better. Children learned. A new sound cut the corridor. The skitter of little drones from security like beetles with badges. They popped smoke and projected light illusions of doors where there were none. The gray soldiers adjusted. They had seen tricks. They had counters. The corridor turned into a chessboard, every square a calculation of time. Mateo stepped out of the shadow and swept the leg of a gray soldier as he would sweep a broom. Humane, precise. The soldier's weight shifted. He fell with a thump that shook the paneling. Mateo didn't try to fight the second soldier. He shoved a cart into him and ran with 2 children. Left, right. He did not look back. He had practiced not looking back until the last moment when it mattered. He heard behind him the sound of a baton hitting metal and the grunt of someone he didn't know taking an impact for him. Elias stood very still. He made one choice and then another. "Sealed XC," he said. "Lock them into fewer choices." He opened a private channel to Sana. "Can you talk to them?" "I can talk," Sana said. "Listening is optional. Say it anyway." Sana inhaled, counted 3 beats to steady her hands, though she was not holding anything. She sent a transmission on the notch she teased. She did not cloak it in math. She used language. "Arch Contractor Vor," she said, and let her voice be what it was. A tired woman who had not intended to be a weapon. "This is Dr. Sana Elbaz of Vale Station. We see you. You are in violation of our laws and the Interstice Accords. We have recorded your signature. If you continue, you will not just be thieves. You will be fools." There was a pause, long enough for the station to take a breath between thumps. Then a voice returned, filtered and precise, the kind of cultivated neutrality that expensive schools taught. "Dr. Elbaz, your station is not a signatory to the Accords. Your system is an unregulated market by your own declarations. We are in compliance with our home jurisdiction's law. We are here under Clause 47 of the Karth Charter. Acquisition for the purposes of labor allocation. Stand down. We will conclude our business and depart without incident." Sana closed her eyes. She heard Leo's drone whispering back in the vents. A tiny phantom tapping on metal, trying to tell security what it saw. She thought of her husband over the planet, counting plankton spirals that brightened when disturbed. She thought of balance, then of violation. She opened her eyes and said softly enough that the translator hesitated. "Do you even realize what you've—" She did not finish the sentence. She did not need to. The station finished it for her. Doors slammed. Air shifted. Thousands of feet turned together. 3 beats to steady hands became 3 beats to steady a community. The man with the borrowed face looked up as the corridor lights bruised to red. He recognized the rhythm of a place coiling to strike. He touched the contract in his pocket as if it could grow teeth. He thought not fear, not yet, but calculation. They would adapt. They always adapted. They would lift the children by careful numbers and then step back into the notch and be gone. He had crews on 3 decks. He had a shuttle with a cold mouth waiting to swallow cargo. He had done this before. He did not know that the sound he was hearing, hundreds of people breathing in unison, quietly, steadily, meant something he had never learned to price. Elias didn't blink. The command deck pulsed with emergency amber, the hum of systems shifting from study to defense. He leaned over the console, fingers tracing holographic paths of the station's arteries. "They'll try to reach the docking shuttles," he said quietly. "We seal them off there, they start to panic." The comm officer swallowed. "Sir, these aren't raiders, they're—" "Clean. Professional. Clean raiders still bleed," Elias said. Sana's voice came over internal comms, rough with static. "I have a lock on their transmissions. They're coordinating through something buried inside the Finch's auxiliary band. I can jam them, but it'll blind us too." Do it, Elias said. Better we all feel our way through the dark than let them see. The lights dimmed. The hum of gravity shifted again, barely perceptible but enough that every human on Vale Station felt their stomachs lift half an inch. Somewhere below, a dozen children cried out as pressure valves equalized. Kaya pressed Yamil's face into her shoulder.
"Breathe," she whispered.
3 beats. The ventilation panel beside them rattled softly. Leo's drone, patched into the duct, blinked green. It emitted a tiny chirp, a language Leo alone understood.
"It's working," he breathed.
The maintenance sensors are relaying. Commander Rourke will see us. Kaya looked through the narrow grate, her eyes catching the reflection of approaching boots. Then we just need to buy time, she murmured. Sarah touched the wall beside her. Time's all we've got. Outside the maintenance shaft, a Dravik analog, broad shoulders, scaled armor catching the red light, strode past, scanning every door. These weren't the same species that hit Harmony Station years ago, but they shared the same hunger wrapped in legalese. Behind the first came 2 others, smaller but carrying equipment pods. They stopped at the locked bulkhead that separated them from another cluster of children. One typed on a wrist device. The door hissed open halfway before Sana's interference jammed the servo, freezing it mid-track. The alien turned toward his subordinate. Translate this human failure, he hissed in his own tongue. Their machines insult me. The subordinate shrugged, unbothered. They're livestock that learned to curse. The leader lifted a hand to strike him, but the sound that followed cut through both of them. A child's voice faint echoing through the metal. Do you even realize what you've done? The words weren't a taunt. They were a question so calm it froze them both. They turned toward the sound. Nothing there but the hum of the ducts. Sana smiled grimly from her console 2 decks above. Leo's relay network had given her a window, and she'd patched her voice through the ventilation sensors. You hear that? She murmured to her technicians. Let's make sure they do. She keyed in another frequency. Her voice poured through every open corridor, soft but everywhere. This is Vale Station Command. You've violated the Interstice Accords, Article 3. You are holding minors. Release them immediately, and you will be treated under interstellar law. Continue, and we will consider your presence an act of war. The alien leader stiffened. His translator blinked the words into his visor, turning them to symbols that made his jaw clench. War, he muttered. Humans misuse that word. From the corner, the man with the borrowed face stepped forward. His name, known only to his employers, was Reth. He adjusted his collar, calm as ever. Let them speak, he said. Their outrage is theater. They lack fleets in this sector. He didn't notice the camera embedded in the ventilation grill watching him. Elias did. On his bridge, the image magnified, the mercenaries' armor markings, the insignia of the Karth Consortium, the glint of Reth's identification implant. Got you, Elias murmured. Sana, patch me through to all decks, the intercom crackled. To everyone aboard Vale Station, this is Commodore Rourke. They've taken hostages, but they are trapped here with us. All personnel follow shelter procedures and stay calm. Security teams, grid pattern Delta 7. We're not prey, we're family, and we take care of our own. The words rippled through the station like an electrical current. In hydroponics, workers armed themselves with tools. In the engineering bay, 2 technicians rerouted coolant to flood certain passages with vapor. In the medical wing, volunteers prepared triage zones. Humanity wasn't built to surrender quietly. In the ducts, Kaya and the others crawled toward the next intersection. They could hear bursts of gunfire far below, sharp, metallic. Mateo will be there, Sarah whispered. He's always the one running toward trouble. He's smart, Kaya said. He'll know when to stop. No, Sarah said. He won't. Mateo was at that moment pinned behind a bulkhead door, his leg scraped by shrapnel. He breathed hard, trying to focus on the pattern his grandmother taught him. Left foot, right hand, inhale, release. The corridor ahead was filled with smoke and shadow. Through the haze, he saw 2 gray figures moving carefully, their helmets glowing faintly. Behind them, the door to Green Shelter 2 was sealed. He'd seen 6 kids go in there before it closed. He wasn't sure how many had come out. He looked down at the service panel by his knee. If he cut the pressure valve manually, he could vent the corridor. Not enough to kill, but enough to make the alien stumble. 3 beats, he muttered. Then he twisted the release. The sudden gust turned the hallway into a storm. The alien staggered, grabbing at railings. Mateo darted forward, low and fast, tackling one into the wall. The other swung its weapon wildly, discharging a pulse that scorched the ceiling. Mateo jammed a tool into the alien's leg joint and wrenched hard. Metal shrieked. The alien went down with a bellow that wasn't quite pain, more surprise. Mateo grabbed the weapon, flung it down the corridor and ran. He didn't stop running until the pressure alarm stopped howling. On the bridge, Sana fed Elias every scrap of telemetry. "They're regrouping," she said. "I think they're waiting for extraction orders. They won't get them," Elias said. "We jammed their long-range bands, unless they have a relay." Elias frowned. "What kind?" "The kind you hide on a captured freighter." The realization hit them both. "The Finch," Sana typed rapidly. "If I can access the Finch's nav array, I can flood their relay with noise. But I'll need someone on site." Elias's eyes went to the list of civilians still unaccounted for. One name blinked red, Dr. Sana Elbaz. "You're not going anywhere," he said. "Then send me someone who can improvise under pressure," she shot back. "Because if they get that relay working, they'll bring reinforcements and this becomes a massacre." He hesitated, then hit the channel to engineering. "Riz Patel report," a gravelly voice answered. "I'm here, sir. You know the Finch better than anyone. I need you to get aboard her and fry any signal she's sending out. Bring whoever you trust." "I'll take Kim and Zhao," Riz said. "Give me 15 minutes." "You've got 10. Riz grabbed his toolkit and 2 crew members. As they suited up, he looked at the camera feed of the Finch docked in silence, a hulking carcass against the void. "All right, old girl," he muttered. "Let's see what's hiding in your bones." Inside the station, Reth watched his team herd the last of the children into containment crates designed for live transport. He hated that term. It made him think of cages. "We're ahead of schedule," one of the mercenaries said. "Don't be proud," Reth replied. "Pride gets you killed." He turned as a voice came over his private channel, thin, urgent, cold. "Extraction window closing. Do you have the inventory?" "Yes," he said, "then finish it." The line went dead. He exhaled, slow. "Finish it," he repeated softly. "You have no idea what that means here." In the ducts, Kaya's group had reached the junction above the cargo bay. Through the grate, they could see movement below. Rows of containers, guards pacing between them. "They're putting the kids in those," Sarah whispered. "How many?" "Too many." Leo's fingers flew across his drone's interface. "If I overload the bay's environmental controls, I can trigger an emergency seal. It'll buy us a few minutes before they bypass it." Kaya nodded. "Do it. Then we find a way to tell command." Leo's small face was streaked with sweat and grime. "What if they find us first?" "Then we make noise," Kaya said. "Loud enough for everyone to hear." He swallowed hard and started typing. Below, Reth's wrist console flashed red. "Environmental lockout initiated." He cursed under his breath. "Who's doing that?" One of the mercenaries shrugged. "Faulty human software." Reth's jaw tightened. "No, this is intent." He motioned for 2 of them to fan out. "Find the interference, and be gentle with what you find." Back on the Finch, Riss and his 2 engineers entered through the service port. The ship's corridors were eerily silent, lights flickering as though the vessel itself wanted to be forgotten. "Power grid stable," Zhao whispered. "That's not good." "No," Riss said. "That means someone's home." They reached the nav array room. It was half-lit, cables dangling. A single console blinked in standby mode. Riss crouched beside it, tracing the signal with his scanner. "Found your heartbeat," he muttered. They piggybacked a transmission node right into the Finch's power spine. "Cute." Kim frowned. "Can you shut it down?" "Not quietly." Riss ripped out a cable. The console flared red, then black. Somewhere deep inside the Finch, a klaxon wailed. "Not quietly," Kim repeated dryly. From the station's command deck, Sana saw the noise spike vanish. "Relays down!" she shouted. "They're blind!" Elias exhaled. "Then it's time we stopped hiding." He keyed the ship-wide intercom. "All units, retake your decks. Push them back to the docks. And if you see anyone wearing gray armor with a counting mark insignia, remind them what happens when you steal from humans." Across Vale Station, the resistance flared like a second sunrise. Civilians armed with cutters and repurposed drones stormed corridors. Security teams moved with ruthless precision. Even children, guided by older students, barricaded doors and used cleaning bots as scouts. Reth listened to the rising chaos and finally understood what the diplomat Telrin had once told his superiors about humans. They don't fight for victory. They fight for each other. The thought unsettled him. In the cargo bay, the lights began to strobe as Leo's hack took effect. The environmental locks sealed, sirens echoing through metal walls. Mercenaries shouted orders, their helmets scrambling comms. Kaya's voice echoed through the ducts again, amplified by Sana's network. "You captured human children," she said. "Do you even realize what you've started?" The phrase repeated, translated by automatic relays into half a dozen alien tongues, bouncing through emergency channels across nearby systems. Every listening outpost heard it. Every trader ship on the fringe recorded it. And far beyond Vale Station, in the Karth Consortium's own data networks, 1,000 alarms began to wake. The words traveled outward on threads of light like seeds on a hard wind. The first to hear beyond Vale Station's hull was a salvage captain cruising the shadow of Ulla's second moon. He frowned, tapped his recorder, and sent a copy to every broker on his list with one line: "Do not touch Karth ships near Vale." The second was an old relay buoy from a war that never quite started. It woke to the urgency embedded in Sana's tone, and appended a code stamped decades ago by a committee that had believed mere language could forestall harm. The buoy did not understand children. It understood tags. It attached the one that meant sanctuary claim and pushed the message further: "You captured human children." The phrase bloomed like lichen on the networks, settling into corners where law and rumor cohabited. Inside the station, rumor was not enough. People needed a point to push. Elias read the echo map on the command screens, the way bodies were moving through corridors, the way doors opened and closed like a lung, and saw the trap tighten. The mercenaries had split their forces. Half had secured the cargo bay with the containment crates. Half had fanned out toward docks and secondary airlocks, intending to peel away homegrown barricades and carve lanes back to the Finch. It was tidy. It almost always worked against settlements that valued their skin over principle. He keyed Security Channel 1. "They're going to use our discipline against us," he said. "So let's use theirs against them. Force them into single-file lanes. Make them line up for their own extraction." "How?" said Haruto, voice breathless, carrying the sound of running shoes on metal. "Cut the power to the pretty parts," Elias said. "Light only the rails. They train in grids. Make them walk a ladder. Down in engineering." Riss's deputy Zhao grinned, despite everything, and threw a series of switches that darkened promenades, cafeterias, and galleries while leaving the emergency strips bright. The station became a tunnel system of white steps in black. Mercenaries, accustomed to their own subtle goggles and luminous visor cues, now saw precisely where humans wanted them to step. "Think that will work?" Kim asked Riss as they crouched in the Finch's nav room listening to the ship's internal klaxon die down under Zhao's blackout. "They're professionals," Riss said. "Professionals hate improvising under someone else's plan." He took a breath, counting it in 3. He had 2 more tasks: power down the Finch's engines in a way that would take hours to reverse, and find any surprises left to make sure hours didn't become seconds. He pried open a floor panel and swore softly, "The way you do when you find a snake asleep where you keep your tools." "Packages," he said. Set along the spine. Kim crouched beside him and swallowed. The packages looked like innocuous canisters, magnetically clamped, each stamped with a tiny warning triangle that could have been for fun. The designation code made her throat dry. "Hull shears. More like hard severes," Riss said. "Pop these at the right time, and the Finch leaves our docking ring in a hurry with or without permission. If the ring comes with her, that's a lot of people who don't go home." He reached for his cutter. "Careful," Kim said. "Always," Riss said, and remembered teaching his niece to solder by making her count 3 beats even when your hands trembled. He cut the first clamp. The mercenary team that had been sweeping the maintenance ducts reached a junction where Kaya's group had paused. The grate was still warm from their bodies. A soldier crouched, touched the metal with 2 fingers, then made a quick hand sign. "Upstream." The second soldier pried the grill loose. He did not see the small coil of wire Leo had wedged a meter down the duct, partly because Leo had wired it into the duct's own sensor lip like a normal part of the machine's mouth. He put his hand on the rim. The coil spit a sharp pop and a shower of sparks. Harmless. But instincts were older than training. The soldier flinched and jerked back, bumping his helmet into his partner's visor. The two knocked into each other, a human comedy with armored consequences. And the moment of fluster was enough time for Sarah to touch Kaya's sleeve. Mouth go. And for Kaya to wriggle them forward 3 meters to a slit that wouldn't have been there without settlement ingenuity. The sort of cut only a worker would know to make. "Here," Someone had made an illegal shortcut to reach the greenhouse pipes. Kaya slid through, Yamil ahead of her, Sarah pushing Leo's pack gently so it didn't catch and tear. Leo's drone, still jacked into the duct network, clicked like a small insect having ideas beyond its size. It had limited flight in such narrow spaces. It did something else. It tasted pressure, charted whispers of moving air, mapped footfalls through the skin of the station, and sent these tastes back to Sana's console in cold, exquisite readings. Sana translated them into motion. Think of 100 cats walking above your ceiling. She saw where the largest steps hit hardest. She marked those places with the symbol for locked ladder. Copied from Elias's plan. Forced them into single file. She opened a second channel to some place she wasn't supposed to. An old legal archive she'd once consulted on a speech about the obligations of stations that had declared independence. Vale had never signed the Interstice Accords. Too far, too proud, too tired of other people's ideas of safety. But Vale had signed something else in its founding. A pledge with Ola's Planetary Council and a coalition of free traders that moved supplies. That pledge had a clause written in language that made lawyers squint and poets sit forward. The clause was a promise to receive and protect miners in crisis within the system, regardless of jurisdiction. The words were not grand. They were simple once for all. They carried the inventor's guilt about the day she had saved her own child and not a stranger's, because the stranger's father had fired on her shuttle. She had written the clause to bruise herself daily. Sana sent the clause into her broadcast as a watermark. Traders felt it as a back-of-neck itch that said you are pledged whether you meant to be. A tug pilot on the night shift rubbed his skin, looked at his co-pilot and said, "I think we're supposed to move." "Move what?" the co-pilot asked, already standing. "Anything that tries to leave." On the dock, one of the mercenary squads reached a sealed door. Beyond it, according to their slate, was a corridor leading to a maintenance tram that, with some persuasion, could be turned into a quick route to the Finch. The soldier at point had the door codes. He keyed them. The door refused. He swore in a rhythm very like Sanaa's primes. He keyed them again, faster, as though speed could change meaning. The door still refused. "Open it," Reth said, arriving behind them like a quiet contradiction. "Someone cut the line," the soldier said. Reth looked at the door and then up at the corner where the camera would be if he had designed this hallway. There it was, a tiny eye within a screw head. He smiled at it the way a man smiles at a dog to show he isn't trying to take food from its bowl. "Dr. Elbaz," he said, assuming she could hear, "you are very good at your job." Sanaa, listening through feeds that weren't designed for respect, felt the compliment land like a pebble on water. "You, less so," she said, not into a microphone, just into the air. He wasn't the target. She pinged Elias. "I can jam and speak. I can't hold them on that corridor indefinitely." "You've bought me 2 minutes," Elias said. "That's a luxury." He sent Mani's team there at a sprint, boots eating the white-lit ladder, breath hard and controlled. When they reached the door, Mani didn't open it. She attached 2 anchor lines to the ceiling and floor, clipped herself in and gestured to Ilya and Haruto to brace. When the door finally irised under another code injection, the 3 of them held the line like a hinge, and the first 2 mercenaries walked into a human trap. Not a net. Just a hallway suddenly smaller than their armor. Mani reached forward, all muscle memory, and tugged a weapon out of a hand with the intimacy of a dance instructor correcting posture. "No," she said, and for a blink, the soldier's body obeyed the command within the word, not because she had authority, but because language sometimes carries weight beyond air. Haruto slid to his left and triggered a foam sprayer. It blossomed at knee level, not sticky, just very uncooperative. The 2 mercenaries stumbled and went down in a careful tangle. Mani didn't crush them. She didn't have time for hatred. She tightened a zip restraint with an efficiency that would make a knot tire applaud, and looked past them at Reth. He held up his hands. "If this is negotiation, this is us getting our kids back," she said, and shut the door in his face. On the Finch, Riss had disarmed 4 of the Severers. He had a system: count, cut, breathe. Count, cut, breathe. He slid along the spine, fingers cautious, hips aching. He wished for younger knees. He would not get them. He popped a 5th clamp and paused. "They wired 2 of these to trip if the others don't," he said. "Clever bastards. Kim Zhao, I need you to find the backup triggers." "On it," Kim said, crawling backward through the narrow space, listening to her breath echo in metal. She had a child at home whose artwork wallpapered her locker. She didn't let herself think about that cabin. It wasn't a talisman, it was a location she would return to because anything else was an unacceptable story. Zhao found the triggers lodged like barnacles near the engine cowling. He laughed, a short burst of admiration. Because engineers love a good piece of ugly work even when it means they might die. He cut the first and second in a series that would have been impossible if he hadn't spent years threading hoses through places other people forgot existed. Sweat ran down his spine. He whispered the count his grandmother had used in the garden. 1 for picking, 2 for placing, 3 for watering. He didn't believe in gods. He believed in rhythm. Back in the cargo bay, the containment crates looked like storage for art or instruments, not children. A mercenary tapped one and glanced at his slate. Inventory complete in this section. "We can't wait," the squad leader said. "We have to move these to the shuttle now that the relay's down." Reth glanced up at the overhead shadows. He could feel the station's weight now. Not gravity, but attention. When he pictured extraction, he pictured the line of white-lit ladder steps and knew they would be stepping on human intention all the way to the dock. "If we move now, we lose control," he said. "Hold until we clear a lane." He saw a tiny gleam at the corner of a crate, an eye. Not a human, a device. He bent and saw that a small hole had been bored into the seam of the crate. He held his breath and very gently touched the edge with his gloved fingertip. A spark flared and died. A taste of Leo's earlier trick. That was not the point of it. It wasn't a booby trap. It was a signal. "Find that," he said softly, and 2 soldiers peeled away to search the walkway above for a child with a pack that hummed like an insect. Kaya, Sarah, and Leo shifted position again, hugging the wall so close their jacket zippers scraped metal with a sound that would feel too loud no matter how quiet it really was. Kaya's hand went numb where she steadied Yamal. She held him tighter. He had stopped asking questions. His breaths came steady. 3 count shallow, then deeper like waves evicting stones. "Listen," Sarah whispered. They went still. Through the floor they could hear something new. A big body's growl. "Thrusters," Leo said. "Not ours. External?" Kaya asked. "Dock tugs," Leo said, surprised, then delighted, on a childish axis even in this moment. "They're moving the Finch." On the tug's tiny bridges, the pilots had not gotten permission because there was no time to get it. They had gotten duty. The pledge Sana had sent through the networks had caught in their throats like smoke. They backed the tugs under the Finch's belly, latched grapples, and nudged the freighter into a slightly wrong alignment. Nothing that would tear metal, just enough that any quick getaway would kink and stall. "If they try to pull," one pilot said, "she'll sit like a mule." "Since when have you known mules?" the other said, laughing because you either laughed or screamed, and laughing kept the hand steady. "Since we decided to be stubborn," the first said. The Karth pilot aboard the Finch, the one they'd left behind to manage separation, felt the tug and frowned. His console showed green for docking clamps. It showed green for engine flow. It showed an amber he didn't like for alignment. He keyed the winch to adjust. The winch did not respond. The winch had been cut at its heart by Riss 20 minutes ago, when Riss had realized that any machine that promises to disengage quickly must have a heart you can slow with a finger if you can find it. The Karth pilot swore in a language that had no words for children and many for profit. He punched a code that raised a different tone in the ship and a different color in his visor. A last option command that would jettison mass to free the ship. Mass could mean cargo, a ring, or a sliver of both. He was not from here. He did not see faces when he touched the command. He saw weights. The ship considered his request. It wondered about the status of the severers along its spine. One was still armed. It would be enough. Riss looked up from under the spine at nothing in particular, and felt the ship hesitate the way animals do before a quake. "They're going to trigger a saver," he said very gently. "I can't reach that last one in time." Kim's voice came back through a shiver of static that sounded like wind through dry leaves. "Then we brace." "No," Riss said with the calm of a man who has accepted a thing. "Then we hang on and we take the cut if it comes so it cuts clean." "We don't let it rip," Riss, Zhao said, making a shape around his name with fear and affection. 3 beats, Riss said. "And if something goes, you 2 go backward into the belly. I'll hold the spine." "Like hell," Kim said. "Like family," Riss said. They clamped themselves to the nearest ribs and waited. On the command deck, Sana's console threw an alarm. Sever sequence armed. She swallowed hard, felt the ring on her lanyard thump against her chest, and threw a software spanner into the Finch's ancient logic. She lied to it about the ring's status. She told it the ring was a wall of stone. The Finch, built to avoid expensive collisions, hiccuped. Its sever program danced around the lie, found an angle, and tried to cut anyway. For a fatal second, the calculation looped between two choices that were both true and impossible. That second was what Riss needed. He jammed his cutter straight into the last canister's belly, and took a jolt that ran up his arm and into his skull like winter water. The canister smoked and died. The sever sequence spat out an error in an irritated, petulant tone and went to sleep. Riss lay under the spine and laughed breathlessly. "Tell the Commodore he owes me a drink," he said. Kim touched his shoulder. "You don't even like him." "I like his drinks," Riss said, and then blacked out for a moment and woke to Zhao's hand on his neck, verifying pulse. He counted 3 beats. They were still there. He let the count carry him back to work. In the cargo bay, the mercenaries felt the ship's hiccup as a tremor through metal. Every professional read vibration as language. This tremor said, "You are not going anywhere fast." The leader looked at Reth. Reth looked at the boxes. He could open them and move, take 10 and run, or 20 or 5. Numbers were easy until they were attached to faces. "Change of plan," he said softly. "What plan?" the leader asked. Insult in the question because he preferred his own. "We must remove the thing they want most," Reth said, thinking of an old lecture about leverage. "If we break their expectation now, we may walk out instead of being carried." "What do they want most?" The leader said, deadpan, perhaps to mock human emotion. Reth surprised himself by not answering children. He said, "Proof." He tapped the tiny camera he'd seen earlier. "And we have given them too much of it." He gestured to a private he trusted to be quiet. "Find their primary broadcast node," he said. "Destroy it. And if you see anyone with a lab badge, detain." The private nodded and melted into the corridors like a stain that moved under its own will. He almost ran into Kaya at the junction of a maintenance walkway and a stairwell. She saw him first and pulled Sarah and Leo back with a hand that found their sleeves without looking. The private pivoted toward the sound, weapon low. Kaya didn't think. She pushed a maintenance cart down the stairs with the confidence of someone who'd moved carts full of soil, often enough to understand weight. It clanged and crashed, a ridiculous avalanche, and the private lifted his free hand at precisely the wrong moment to avoid it. Sarah leaped forward and jammed a broom handle into the crook of his elbow. The weapon clattered to the floor. Leo's drone threw its tiny light into the private's visor at point blank. Not a blinding brightness, just a screaming white square in a dark field. The private swore and reached for Sarah's hair, grabbing braid. Kaya kicked his knee in a way her grandmother would have scolded and then congratulated. He went down on one knee with a sound like a bookshelf tilting. He swung at them, the desperate swipe of someone who had never been a child protecting a sibling. And Kaya, not thinking of heroics, grabbed Leo and Sarah and Yamil and ran. The private stood dizzy, and fired a pulse down the hall in a line they had already vacated. The pulse scorched paint and embedded a stink into air filters that would last hours. He considered pursuit, the neat fantasy of catching, then remembered his orders. He turned left toward the lab. Sana's lab door did not look like anything worth guarding. That was intentional. She liked quiet. She liked to be underestimated because her job worked better when people thought she chased phantoms. She had 2 interns in the room now, eyes wide, hands flying over consoles. The door pinged. She ignored it. The door pinged again. She ignored it again. The third ping turned into a manual override request. She looked up then, met the camera's round black pupil with the same directness she used when speaking to an animal. "No," she said aloud, a human refusing an inanimate thing. But the inanimate thing had an animate person behind it. And the logic of magnets does not respect syllables. "Commodore," she said on a private line. "Someone's at my door who didn't bring flowers." "Hold 2 breaths, Elias said. "Haruto." "I'm closest," Haruto said, voice tight with the strain of sprinting. 2 minutes, he lied, because he knew it would be 3 and didn't want her counting the wrong way. Sana stood. She took the ring off her lanyard and set it on the desk. She rolled her sleeves up to her elbows and thought, absurdly, of the first cake she had baked with her grandmother, and the way the old woman had slapped her hand away from the oven door and said, "Wait until your breath is calm." She counted 3 beats and felt her throat loosen. The door slid open with a hiss that tried to sound polite. The private stepped in, ducking his helmet because the lab's door was lower than he was used to. He held his weapon's muzzle down in a way that reassured no one. "Dr. Elbaz?" he asked, making the name less human by grinding it. "Yes," she said. "And you?" "Unimportant," he said, almost apologetically. He glanced toward the consoles. "Shut those down." "No," she said. He blinked. He had expected bargaining. "I am instructed to detain you if you resist." "You misunderstand me," she said. "I am not resisting." "Then shut." "I am refusing," she said, and there was something in the slight shift of her shoulders that recalibrated the room. The interns looked at each other and tried not to grin because fear had made their mouths dry, and humor gave them spit again. The private stepped forward. Sana stepped back. The interns did not lunge. They did not try to be heroes. They executed the very boring thing Sana had trained them to do a dozen times a month. They pushed the button that sent the lab's floor into lockdown mode. It locked their consoles to the counter with a mechanical kiss, and it released a mist that smelled like an herb used in Ula's kitchens. The private inhaled by reflex. He stumbled and shook his head, clearing it with admirable speed. The mist wasn't a drug. It was a marker. It would cling to his armor and his joints and his skin for days and make him smell like soup. "Why?" he began, and Sana reached behind her, hit the emergency vent release, and the lab's windows became mouths that opened to the station's interior atmosphere exchangers. Air roared through the room, a sudden wind that pushed the private to one knee and flung papers into an impossible flock. Sana held onto the counter with one hand and simultaneously executed the trick of her trade. She took a piece of signal that had been debating whether to be data or song, and made it both. She pushed her broadcast into the station's water monitors, the waste processors, the food printers, so every machine that sustained life whispered the same thing whenever someone touched it. "You captured human children." Her interns laughed then, because what else do you do when your workplace becomes a prayer wheel? The private rose, swaying like a tall tree in a storm. Sana could have run then. She did not run because she did not yet see Haruto, and because she did not practice running in rooms small enough to count. The private moved closer, hand out as if to take her elbow politely. She was about to bite him. She had decided, with the clarity of a small rebellion, that biting a man who wanted to unmake your work was dignified. When Haruto slid through the open door and did a very clean thing. He intercepted the hand that reached for Sana and redirected it the way he had redirected balls in the gym since he was 6, using the aggressor's weight as if it were already an accident. The private stumbled. Haruto stepped behind him and wrapped a line around the private's wrists with a motion so practiced that Sana's interns clapped. Haruto said, "No autographs," and Sana loved him for that because humor again gave them spit. The private didn't fight hard. He had orders about collateral. He had orders about optics. He also had the soup smell in his nose, and it made him think of home, which he had left young and with promises of wealth that had shrunk each year like wool in hot water. He slumped. Haruto looked at Sana. "You all right?" "I'm furious," she said, which was not an answer and exactly was. Reth watched his slate. The little green dots that meant his teams turned amber, then red. The corridor that had been a ladder now braided back on itself like a forester's trick path. He had lost the relay. He had lost the sever. He had lost the lab node. He had the children, though, which he had thought would be enough to win any argument and was discovering might lose him this one. He had orders in his ear he could no longer pretend he couldn't hear. Finish, finish, finish. He had a contract in his pocket, stiff with seals that would never be honored here again. He made a choice that was not in the contract. He told the leader of the cargo team, "Prepare to move the first crate to the dock." The leader grinned, ferrule under a visor. "Finally. Pick crate number 7, Reth said. "Why?" The leader asked. "Because I said so," Reth said. He would not say because 7 was empty, because he had seen a child lift a grate in a way that told him which crate the drone watched. He would not say because he wanted to learn whether he could still be a person who chose something other than obedience. They lifted crate 7 and carried it with care into the white-lit ladder corridor. People on both sides watched that procession. Mercenaries in gray, humans in patchwork, cameras in corners. Reth walked behind the crate like a coffin bearer. He did not look at faces. He looked at steps. When they turned the corner at the last bend before the dock, he stopped. The leader looked back. What? They were looking at 6 dock tugs. Their noses pressed into the Finch's belly, engines idling like patient animals. Behind them, on the outer ring, trapped freighters drifted idle, their captains listening to their own copies of Sana's phrase, and deciding what would be remembered later, by children not taken. The path to departure did not exist. Not for now. Back, Reth said softly. We can push through, the leader said, tone saying, "We are stronger. We can always be stronger." "No," Reth said. "You afraid of them?" The leader jeered. "They're farmers and teachers." "Afraid of the story we become," Reth said, which was the only answer that had ever made sense to him. The leader laughed like a door slam and moved forward. Reth put his hand on the crate and did not move. The leader stopped. He could override Reth, he could shoot him. There would be a note in a report, a commendation or a reprimand depending on who read it and when. He did not shoot because the story was already sliding out from under him and no shot would put weight back. He turned abruptly and shoved the crate into the wall with a crack that echoed down the corridor. "Break that broadcast," he snarled. "Break it or we start killing the older ones." The threat came thin over the comms like old soup through a sieve. It reached Elias's ears, and a quiet fell over the command deck that was not fear so much as preparation doing the last buttons. Elias didn't say anything for a long second because words mattered, and he had used a lot of them and he wanted these ones to land like a final nail. When he spoke, he didn't raise his voice. He spoke in the tone of a man explaining the inevitable to a storm. "If you hurt a child," he said, "we call fleets. Not our own, we don't need to. We call the Mother's Charter. We call the Free Guild Embargo. We call the Navigator's Oath, and then, Arch-Contractor Vor, we call your creditors. We will set your name to every invoice between here and your home port with a line that reads, 'Did not honor sanctuary.' Your ships won't find fuel for a generation." Reth did not answer because the comm jam made words bounce. He heard enough, though, creditors. He knew the only gods the Karth worshipped. He imagined their eyes when they saw that line. He imagined the tightening at the corners of their mouths. He had seen it once when a rival had defaulted on a shipment of medical ice. That man had not flown again. The consortium did not jail. The consortium prevented. He made a second choice, stranger than the first. He tapped his private channel. The voice that answered was Old Money. Smooth, impatient, an ocean of confidence wearing a face. "Report. The situation is compromised," Reth said. "Recommend abort." "We do not abort," the voice said, making the word sound like a poor man's shirt. "We achieve. Not today," Reth said. "Sir, they have invoked multilateral compacts. The Mother's Charter, the old nursery tale," the voice said, amused. "Fairy stories your people tell to ease conscience." Reth thought of Sana's voice pouring through pipes. He thought of the leverage that had seemed so clever, and now felt like a rope around his own throat. "Fairy stories that get cargo stranded," he said. Silence, then, "Proceed. Or do not come home," Reth lowered his hand. The corridor hummed with held breath. Human, alien, machine. He looked up and saw in the corner a camera that was a screwhead and not at all innocent. He knew with the clarity of someone stepping off a roof and feeling gravity take him, that this would be remembered. He could not be the man who made the wrong sentence happen. He could be the man who delayed it long enough for a better sentence to land. He lifted his hand to signal retreat. The leader from the cargo team grabbed his wrist. They stared at each other over a crate that still looked like a coffin because humans are not the only species with metaphors. "You ruin us," the leader said. "Perhaps," Reth said, "but not today." The leader let go and prepared to ruin him personally later. That later would not come because the turning of stories is sometimes faster than plans. The crate was still pressed against the wall where it had cracked. The crack widened now with a soft sound like exhaled grief. From the jagged seam slid a hand, small, ink-stained. It gripped the edge and held. The corridor stopped being a corridor then, and became a throat through which every person present felt their own breath. Kaya squeezed Sarah's forearm and let out a noise she did not name because names are what you put on things when you can bear to categorize them. Leo's eyes flooded and then cleared the way rooms do when a pressure equalizes. "We have to move now," he said to no one and everyone. Elias's screen filled with dots. People moving toward the cargo bay from every direction as if a magnet had been switched on. Sena's broadcast whispered through machines. "You captured human children. Do you even realize what you've—" And the machines absurdly did seem to realize, if only because people touching them imprinted the realization. Reth stepped forward and put his hand on the small hand that had emerged. He did not grip. He covered it. Then he looked up and said quietly, "We will open the boxes." The leader gaped. "We will not." "We will," Reth said. "And we will stand down." "You have no authority." Reth smiled then in the way a man smiles when he has just resigned from a job in a way that will hurt very much tomorrow. "Watch me exercise it." He touched the emergency release on the crate. Nothing happened. The leader looked smug and would later regret this single human expression, because it did not read well on his species. Reth struck the release hard with the butt of his weapon. The seal gave like old glue. The door popped outward 6 centimeters and stayed. From inside came a sound that was not crying and not cheering, a held sound humans make when they see light after time in a small dark. A sound that says, "You came." It is a sound the Karth cannot make because they do not come for each other. Elias thought of his letter to his daughter, folded on the rail. He had written about budgets and caution. He would rewrite it later with one sentence only. "We are the kind of people who go." "Security," he said. Breach, Haruto, Mani, and Ilya moved as one. Mateo reached the bay and threw his arm over a railing and swung down because stairs were too slow. Kaya and Sarah found a vantage above the crates they could use to guide smaller hands. Leo crawled back into the duct to speak to his drone like a brother. Sana steadied her intern's shoulders and said, "Keep whispering because the universe needs repetition to learn like a child." The first crate door swung fully. A boy blinked into the hard light and squinted like a mole becoming a person again. He looked up and saw a soldier in gray with his hands held out, palms empty. He saw behind the soldier 100 faces of his own species making the same shape with their bodies. Reaching. Ready. He stepped forward. Reth held his breath because sometimes mercy is physical. He could not say the phrase forming in Sana's network. It did not belong in his mouth. He stepped back. There were still mercenaries with orders. There were still weapons. There was still math and time and the possibility that panic could tip the board again. But the board had changed in a way that could not be computed because computation requires variables, and one of the variables now had a soul. Kaya saw the boy stumble on the lip of the crate and leap down without thinking. Hands up, letting his weight into her arms in a way that could topple her but didn't. He was heavier than Yamil, lighter than Mateo. He smelled like plastic and fear, 2 scents she would never mistake again. "You're out," she said, and her voice had a crack on the last word that made it true in a way commands sometimes never are. Sarah took his hand and pivoted, showing the path like a dancer showing a partner the exit they can't see. "Step, step, step," she said. 3 beats. The boy's feet matched the count because humans are good at rhythm when they need to be. From somewhere far in the ring a horn sounded. One of the old alarms used once for fire and then forgotten. Someone had woken it because sometimes you need noise that is not language. It echoed through the station, through ducks and dreams, and it said the one thing that the entire system seemed to be saying: we are not abandoning our own. On the outer ring, the salvage captain who had first copied the broadcast sent another set of messages, not polite now but edged with the kind of anger you only taste when someone tries to write a story on your behalf and forgets you know how to write. He sent it to rivals. He sent it to enemies. He sent it to people he owed coin and to people who owed him. He included the video of a small ink-stained hand sliding out of a crate seam. He wrote simply, "Never again on our lanes." Reth looked at the leader and saw that his face had become a mask of a man thinking in only 2 options. Reth had known many like him. He had been like him. He hoped to stop being like him before the day killed him. He raised his weapon, one hand only, gesture broad enough to be read by humans watching through cameras and narrow enough to be dismissed by his employers later as a tactic. He lowered it to the ground and let it lie there like a snake that had forgotten how to move. He lifted his other hand and touched his own visor, holding the open channel key. "Arch-contractor Vor," he said, and his voice sounded smaller than the ocean he had represented a moment before. "Abort. This field is closed." The answer that came back was not the arch-contractor's voice. It was the cold, anonymous tone of the consortium's dead office, which he had never in his life heard directly. "Because you do not hear from such offices unless the world has turned against you." It said, "Default noted." He smiled despite himself. "Do you even realize what you've—" he began, and this time he finished it for himself, quietly. "Made possible." He looked at Sana's camera and thought, "If I live, will you—" And then he laughed because the if was the size of a planet. Elias did not relax. He began counting. He would not stop until 30, then 300, then everyone, always everyone. He began the count with the old habit his mother had used to teach him patience when he was small and furious. 3 beats to steady. The word beat matched the station's heartbeat now. It matched the sound of feet moving toward the bay from every corridor like rivers finding a sea. Sana paused long enough to send the clause again. The pledge that had looked like poetry when written and had hardened into law under pressure. once for all. She thought of writing to the woman who had first drafted it, dead now, memorialized in a small plaque near a water fountain no one read. She would have told her. It worked. The cargo bay became a harbor. Crates cracked. Hands caught. The mercenaries who refused to stand down found themselves gently relocated by people who had not eaten lunch yet, and had no intention of doing so until every child had a cup of water and a blanket. One soldier fired into the ceiling in panic and was rewarded with 30 glares, and a disarming so efficient he might later suspect telekinesis. Mateo directed traffic with his quiet voice that carried because people listened when a person didn't waste their breaths. Sarah ran along the line and tapped shoulders and said, "Left hand on the rail, keep moving, don't stop to look." Kaya stayed near the crates because she knew that the moment of stepping out is when knees buckle. Leo's drone buzzed and blinked and began recording faces. Names poured into its memory like seeds into a paper packet, something to be planted and remembered. Reth stood to the side with hands empty. The leader shoved him hard twice, the second time with a little too much force to be professional. Reth didn't fall. He watched a girl with 2 braids cut off a strip of her own shirt to wrap a boy's scraped knuckles. He watched an older man in a Doc Tug jacket hold a baby, like he'd been training for this exact weight. He watched Haruto tie a perfect knot and grin at Sana's interns like a man after a win in a game that had been brutal and necessary. He thought very briefly and without shame of what work for a living could look like if he walked away from contracts and toward promises. Outside the station, the message that had become a warning became something else, a rule. Traders turned their ships to present their flanks to the Finch, the body language of space that means you will not pass here. A pair of distant patrol craft who owed no allegiance to anyone, but owed a debt to decency, set their transponders to a code that effectively made them lighthouses. The light said, "Stand down." In the command deck, Elias finally let air all the way out of his lungs and saw Riss's icon blink green again from the Finch. "How bad?" he asked. "Severed ego, intact hull," Riss said, hoarse but alive. "Medical on the way," Elias said. "Send coffee," Riss said. "You hate coffee," Elias said. "Send it anyway," Riss said. "I deserve to spit it out." Sana closed her eyes very briefly. When she opened them, she began compiling the packet that would go to everyone later. The signatures, the faces, the sound of the horn, the scent of soup sprayed on one man's armor becoming a joke that made fear manageable. She would send it with a phrase no machine could translate into currency, and every parent could translate into bone. We counted them, and we did not stop at 30. And still, although the tide had turned, although later historians would mark this moment as the hinge, the work was not done. There were still doors to open, apologies to make, laws to write, debts to collect, and a boy in a crate still too scared to step out without someone meeting his eyes and saying, "Come." So Kaya did it again and again, and each time she extended her hand, the phrase in her head changed a little. From accusation to promise. Do you even realize what we've done? We came. When the last crate door creaked open and the sound inside it was just a child's hiccup breath, someone, somewhere, began to cry in that low, relieved way humans have when the worst thing did not become the true thing. The cry traveled and turned into laughter before it died. It would become a song later. It would become law later. It was already legacy. On the deck above, Sarah found Leo sitting hard on the floor, hands shaking so badly he had to tuck them under his knees. She sat with him and put her forehead against his temple, breath sinking without asking to the count they'd learned. 3 beats to steady. "We did it," he said. "We started it," she corrected, smile edged like a blade you polish for tomorrow. "Now we finish."